Welcome to Tomorrow Never Knows with your hosts, me, Bob Wilson, and Sir Warren Brown. Our guest is Badfinger's own Joe Tansin. Joe has played with many, but has a style that's all his own. Where dancing the Badfinger Boogie, music resounds through the Beatles Kingdom. Beatles Magazine, our sponsor, is a publication with 370 plus million visitors and all their pages read by thousands of fans around the world every day. Beatles news is updated daily, 24 hours. It's on there for you. Audio, video, photos, interviews, contests, additional materials, and even more. Tune in to find out what. Follow Beatles Magazine, the most complete online coverage, 24 hours a day. And how many days a week, Sir Warren?
8 days a week.
8 days a week. I love it. Well, welcome to our esteemed guest. How are you?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be talking to a member of Badfinger who's now doing solo work and food work. So it's a good day. I must ask, what first inspired you to pick up an instrument? And who were the musicians that early on inspired you where you said, hey, I got to pick this up and play like that guy?
Well, the first one was Elvis Presley. I remember hearing Heartbreak Hotel for the first time, and I think that really that was the turning point in my life where I think I'd made a conscious decision at that point that this is what I was going to do. Before that, it would have been Al Jolson, the jazz singer. My dad was a big fan, and there was always music in the house. My mom would walk around vacuuming the living room, listening to Frank Sinatra and Connie Francis. And my dad, Al Jolson, so he would take me into some of the local department stores in the record section and buy me Al Jolson records. And I learned all those songs as a kid, like Swami and When the Red Robin Comes Bob Bobbin, After You've Gone. So from probably about age 8 to age 11, he was kind of a hero of mine. And then Elvis came along, and rock and roll kind of affected me. And through Elvis, I discovered Ricky Nelson, the Everly Brothers, who I loved as a kid, to the beautiful two-part harmony. And then it was a few years later, the Beatles came over, and I remember hearing, I think Love Me Do or Please Please Me for the very first time at a friend's house. They didn't even have a record label in America at the time. I'm not sure if that was on Holly Records, PJ, or some small indie label, and a friend of mine had a copy and played that for me, and I just thought, well, I've never heard anything so good in all my life, and that really drove it home. And from that point forward, I never looked back. I just kept playing and singing.
Now, you mentioned your household. It sounds like everybody loved music. If I may be so bold, can I ask a bit about your parents beyond, they seem to have always been playing music and such. What were they like? And did they play any musical instruments, or they were just fans, listeners?
No, they both sang. And just around the house, and they both had really good voices. My mother was a good singer, and so was my dad. But they never aspired to be musicians, and it was just they had a great love of music. And I think my dad more so than my mom, because he after he's been gone now for about 20 years, and when I kind of look back on my life with him, I realized how much of an influence he really had, because in the later 60s, he started driving a truck. He was a real working class guy. Started out to be a police officer in Chicago, and he loved Merle Haggard, George Jones, and Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was the man. And I grew up listening to those records too, probably in the later 60s. And at the time, I kind of thought they were corny and I didn't want anything to do with it. But later on, I started to appreciate it. And he, I guess, kind of vicariously lived through me. He super encouraged me my entire life to follow this dream, of being able to earn a living playing music. And it was something he wished that he had, the ability and the talent to do. And he realized it was genuine with me. And I wasn't just somebody trying to get out of getting a 9-to-5 job by hiding behind a guitar. That, this was my calling in life. And he encouraged that every step of the way until the day he died.
Well, here with this show, we're trying to get out of doing 9-to-5 jobs, but I digress. But I wouldn't mention this unless you just said what you said, but my dad was an NYPD officer, and my grandfather, or his father, was a truck driver. So it's funny that you mentioned those two occupations, and God bless those people with what's going out now. Watch over them. Those policemen, the firemen, the truck drivers, and all the EMS and doctors. So we just sent that vibe out today. God watch over them. You came from Chicago, if I'm correct, and my research was not faulty. How did Chicago influence your musicianship, or did it in any way? And what was it like growing up in the Chicago area?
Well, I look back on that now too. Everything is kind of rear view mirror and retrospect at this stage of the game, and I realized how influential and how important that city was. For my foundation and the building blocks to where I am today. We had an amazing music history there. We have the electric blues, which came from a lot of the sharecroppers from the South would migrate to Chicago in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, and that's when they were put out of work. And nobody was picking cotton by hand anymore, and that's how people like Muddy Waters wound up in Chicago. And they ended up picking up electric guitars because they all played acoustic guitars, and they couldn't be heard over a drum set and an electric bass, so they switched over to electric guitars, and a lot of them played in this part of town called Maxwell Street, and it was a big open flea market in Chicago. Mostly middle or European Jews that came over here during the turn of the century, and a lot of the blacks wound up down there too. And the two never had problems with one another. No fighting, none of that stuff, is because they were both used to being the downtrodden and persecuted, the Jews from Europe and the blacks from the South. So they got along really well. And they had this open flea market. My dad would take me down there in the early 60s. You could buy anything. You could even buy the wheels back from your car. When you park your car 2 blocks away, you find wheels look really familiar. And you could buy anything there. And I used to go to look for old guitars and old amplifiers and leather jackets, because all the pimps would shop down there, and the black guys who played the blues, and they bought like alligator shoes there and leather jackets. And I thought it was just a really cool place. And there's a little short scene in the Blues Brothers movie. I don't know if you remember that, where they're in this little diner, and Aretha Franklin and her husband is going to go back and join the band, and she's pissed off. And I think
the Blues Brothers.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Well, that was shot down in Maxwell Street, down in Chicago. So, not to get off on a tangent, but
go ahead. I do it all the time.
Blues music really, since it was in my own backyard, so to speak, I discovered that at a real early age. And kind of we were hearing all this stuff from England, Led Zeppelin and the Jeff Beck group, and Fleetwood Mac, early Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green, and being young kids, we're really more impressed with the haircuts and the accents than anything else. And later on, and this was my first encounter with the blues. And then one day, maybe a few years later, I woke up and went, a friend of mine gave me a Muddy Waters record and just said, Joe, you ought to listen to this. And when I discovered people like Muddy and Willie Dixon, Howlin' Wolf, I at that moment, I was just totally mesmerized by it. I lived and breathed that music. And to this day, it's the one most comforting sound in music to me that I can totally relate to. The trends in music come and go, and I've seen them over the last 50 years. But there's something about the blues and country music that's never going to go away. And today when I pick up a guitar, the first thing I'm going to do is I'll play a Robert Johnson song or something. I mean, it had a profound impact on me. And then all the great soul music that came from Chicago too, like Curtis Mayfield and Gladys Knight and Pips, they were from Chicago. Loved all of that stuff. So in a roots sense, Chicago was a very important part of my musical history. But for popular music, I mean, we had a couple of bands from Chicago who turned out to do something, and I think Cheap Trick probably I thought was the best of them when I look back on it. But I didn't care too much for all the local bands. They were probably one of the few that I liked.
Now, you mentioned Muddy Waters. Did you have any further any interaction with him besides listening to him? Did you ever see him play or play with him or anything like that?
Yeah, both. Met him a few times. He used to drink scotch and water. I remember he'd ask me to buy him a scotch and water, and I'd, get to sit in with his band a couple of times. I've even got the photographs to prove it.
That's a good deal. Can we put those on the show?
Pardon?
Can you send those over so the fans could see them on the show?
Yeah, sure. Just tell me where afterwards, and I'll send them to you.
We'd love to see that.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy, and he was so friendly and so cordial. And to me, if there's anybody, the top 5 people to have met in my lifetime, that if I could have had a bucket list of people that I would love to meet and say, oh, I met him and had a nice conversation with him, Muddy's name would have been on that list.
Yeah, incredibly so. Did you have occasion, probably not under those circumstances, but in addition to photographs, did you record any of the songs you guys covered?
No.
Just checking. No. What was it that the Blues Brothers ordered when they went to the diner? Was it 4 fried chickens and some dry white toast? I think that was it.
You mean the Blues Brothers movie?
Yes.
Yeah, that was funny. Well, they used to have it in a lot of the black neighborhoods in Chicago. You could get the best fried chicken, and also and black people don't want to talk about that today because they think it's a stereotype. But you know what? I love that food. And they used to have these rib shacks all over, the south side of Chicago. And to this day, I still remember those things, and they were amazing. I mean, the food was great, and it was cheap. I wish I could go for stuff like that in California.
Well, there you go. You could put a stage in there, and when you play and they come in and get that food, I think you'd have a winner on your hands.
Yeah. So it's something they tried to do at the House of Blues years ago, but they ended up, charging $30 for some soul food. You pay $30 for fried chicken.
Oh, wow.
A bargain.
Yeah.
Bargain at that price.
Yeah. Funny enough, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but years ago I did a behind the music thing for Badfinger, and I was one of the first guys they contacted. And I guess they couldn't really find Joey, and they did it at the Hard Rock Cafe. And I remember sitting upstairs in their like VIP room and getting ready to do the interview, and I'm there all day long. And me and my ex-wife were there, and we're getting hungry. They wouldn't even feed us.
Wow.
That's how cheap the Hard Rock Cafe was.
Wow. That's unreal.
Yeah, they made us pay for our own meals. So, this is payback to you guys.
Wow. I wonder if Paul McCartney walked in there, if they make him pay.
He owns it.
I don't know. Good question.
He probably owns it. That's right.
Well, they wouldn't make Paul pay, but they'd make Ringo pay.
Yeah, right. Poor Ringo. Good story.
Now, you're just a drummer. You got to pay for your food.
That's a funny one.
Hey, now we heard you have a new, well, not brand new, but a show going on, My Backyard. How did My Backyard come about? And is that your actual home in the show?
Yeah. It's been an idea that I've had for about 4 years now, and we're actually starting to shoot. We shot in Malibu last couple of weeks ago at a friend of mine's ranch. I'm going to have Angie. I'm going to try to talk Angie and Ruth into coming over for some pizzas, and we may do a show with her. My house has always been ground zero for great food and music over the years.
And a great view. I love that house, and that view is awesome.
Oh, well, that's not the house. That's Moon Shadows Restaurant. Here's a shout out to that's on a friend of mine owns that place. His name is Andreas. And if you have a chance, any of your viewers happen to be in Los Angeles on vacation or whatnot, go in and have something to eat there, because there's a view over the Pacific Ocean to die for, and the food's great. And Andreas is he's a genuine Italian gentleman. He came over here many years ago from Italy, and he owns 2 restaurants. And that place has kind of been around for a long, long time. My house is probably about 10 miles from the place. And
I'm slow on the uptake. I don't want to interrupt, but could you name the restaurant again so that the fans hear it?
Moon Shadows on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu.
All right. Shout out to Andreas. You're always welcome on the show if you bring food.
So if you want me to go back, my backyard has always been kind of the center point for, really great food, and people would come over. They could get a gumbo or an etouffee or fantastic homemade pastas, ravioli. I've been cooking as long as I've been playing music, and if I probably wouldn't have chose a guitar, to have in my hand all the time, it would have been a chef's knife. So everybody that knows me and knows me well knows my passion for food. And we'd sit around and, bottles of wine would get drunk. And if it was Mexican food, there'd be some fine tequilas, or maybe a 20-year-old, 25-year-old single malt scotch at the end of the night. Well, at the end of the evening, the guitars would come out, and then, people would start telling stories, funny stories. And if they were musicians, it'd usually be experiences they've had on the road, or funny experiences they've had in life. And, musicians run into a lot of characters, more so than, people who just work 9-to-5 jobs. And we all have some great stories. And one day I woke up, I thought, boy, if I could take this and put it into a half-hour format and turn it into a show. At first, I wanted to call it Tansin's Table, and it kind of evolved into My Backyard. But that's been the idea. And then about a year ago, we started shooting, and probably summertime, fall, you'll start to see some of the episodes on YouTube, and hopefully Netflix will catch their attention and maybe end up over there.
You're welcome to come back on and plug those if you answer one question. You'd be welcome anyway, but I wanted to use any leverage I had. Do you know how you said etouffee? I've heard that once before, and I don't know what it is. I know, is that
okay. Etouffee means in Cajun, it means smothered, and smothered is smothered in gravy or a sauce. There's several kinds of etouffees, but the best one is crawfish, which is very difficult to get in Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible today. So the best substitute is shrimp, and I won't get into the details of how it's made, but it's probably my favorite Cajun dish.
You can go to Louisiana and get all the crawfish you need.
Well, you can order it there too. I understand some people will ship it to you.
Wow, I didn't know that. And sorry, Bob, go ahead.
It's just at the end of the movie JFK with Kevin Costner, they said to the Tommy Lee Jones character, who played Clay Shaw, after he was acquitted at the trial, they said to him, "What will you do now?" And he said, "I shall go home and have some etouffee and then go fishing." So I always wondered what that was. Now I know.
Well, now you know. And the next time if you ever have an opportunity to get a good crawfish etouffee, take the best food experience you'll ever have.
I am on it. Now going back a little to Badfinger. I heard one that the name for the band came from the working title to A Little Help from My Friends. Badfinger Boogie. But there's a rumor that George Harrison said that Helga Fabdinger, a stripper from Hamburg who they were friends with, was the way the name was come up from. So I don't know if that's true, but if it's not, you could either embellish the story for fun and the magic of radio, or just tell us the true story.
Well, here's what I know. I think it was Derek Taylor and John Lennon sitting at a bar together, and this is what I've been told. John said, "We got to come up with a name for these guys." The Ivies just wasn't cutting it, and he got the name from the who's Fats Waller, the piano player, Badfinger Boogie, and it might have been Derek Taylor that just said Badfinger, and that was it. They became Badfinger that evening. Now, I can't tell you if that's gospel, but that's what I heard.
I like it. I also liked Helga Fabdinger. I thought that was a pretty good one, especially with the Fab in there because it's kind of Beatles-ish. Now,
well, I'd also heard John Lennon wanted to call them the Pricks with an X.
Nelly.
Yeah.
And that's a true story. Prix.
Wow.
I'm stunned. I'm shocked and stunned.
And something only John can come up with.
I think.
Yeah, he was way ahead of his time, even with his sense of humor.
Yep. That's a good one. Thank you for that one, Joe.
Yeah.
Now, you've composed many wonderful songs. I was wondering if at the end of the show we were going to ask you about a particular song, but I'll risk going over it twice if it comes to that. But you've composed many wonderful songs. One of them that we were going to ask you about later was Reflections in My Life, so maybe we would wait for that one later. But besides that one, if you could choose 3 of your songs and just what they mean to you and how they came about off the top of your head.
Well, if you want to ask me about favorites, there's a few of them that you might not be aware of, and I think the only place that you'd even be able to reference them would be on SoundCloud. But one in particular is a song called "Time Wasted," and if you want to listen to it, you're going to have to go on SoundCloud. At some point, there may be a music video to that song, and it's a very reflective song. I was going through a divorce, a really terrible divorce, and I slept with a pencil and paper at the side of my bed. And when I first had the idea of the song, I said to myself, every single word in this song is just going to have to be just right, just perfect. And it took me about 3 or 4 months to write it, but today, that's what I'm most proud of, and I think it's really just a beautiful piece of music, and it offers a lot of hope. Basically, telling people, look, everybody has to grieve about death, about divorces, relationships ending. I mean, we all go through grieving processes, but the gist of the song is don't grieve too long, because at the end of the day, there's a certain point where it just becomes time wasted. Get on with your life. Don't waste your life away grieving about something that's not going to come back, or somebody that's not going to come back, you know, whether it be a death or, you know, the resolution of a marriage. You know, life just has to go on and has to go forward. And that's kind of what inspired that song.
Well, Joe, just to let you know, I have a SoundCloud account, and I will definitely be looking that song up.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys even have the ability to play it on a show at some point, but it's really a wonderful song, and I think a lot of people that listen to it will be, you know, be inspired or uplifted, and it might help you out and get you through a bad time.
Right. If I can download it, I will definitely do that and put it on the background of the show.
Another one. Once again, I'm going to say the same thing. Some of the things that I like the most are things I've recorded over the last 10 years. And I did another one with a female actor who's, her name is Danielle Pizzuti, also a wonderful singer. And a song called Nothing Ever Stays the Same. Also on SoundCloud. And one more with her called Love Just Ain't Enough. That's Joe Tansin and Danielle Pizzuti. All just fine pieces of music, and I'm very proud of these. And at some point in the near future, music videos may appear on YouTube for those songs.
And do you have a couple of more songs, maybe two more that you might want to mention that are among your favorites, or ones that just come to mind for a special reason?
It's stuff I recorded with Dean, but they wouldn't necessarily be songs that I had written completely on my own. We did one called The Glasgow Road, which was co-written, Dean and I. And
Let me check that. Wait. The judges rule that we can include that. We include co-compositions. Click on Jeopardy. We have a panel of judges here, and they just gave me the thumbs up. I just wanted to be sure.
Oh, there's another one. Yeah. One called Love Can't Hide I wrote with Joey Mullen. It was primarily Joey's song, but Joey was missing a bridge, and I just happened to have the bridge, and the piece fit really well in the song. He recorded it, I don't really think officially, but I decided one day, I woke up and I had the song in my head. For some reason, songs are like that. So, shit just kind of pops into your head that you haven't thought about sometimes in 10 years. And I started thinking about it, over a few days, and I thought I should record that. So I changed a few of the lyrics. I took some liberty and probably changed a few words that he had written and recorded the song. You'll find that on SoundCloud as well. A song called Love Can't Hide, and it was written during the Badfinger airwaves period. It didn't wind up on the airwaves album because it was a really good song. Maybe because it was finished actually, because I gave him the bridge at that point, but for one reason or another, we didn't record it, and I ended up recording it in, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And that's a good one. That's a real good one, and it's on SoundCloud right now.
If I can interject here for a moment, Joe, what's the address, or what would listeners search for on SoundCloud to find these pieces of work of yours?
I believe it's just Joe Tansin. If you just type in Joe Tansin on SoundCloud, you'll come up with all these tracks.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a address for people to go to.
Off the top of my head, I'm not really sure. But as we continue to talk, I'll see if I can get on my laptop here and find it.
Okay, I thank you very much for that. And sorry, Bulldog.
Maybe we could get one of those on the show too, if you have your permission. That would be fun.
Say that again.
Maybe we could get one of those songs, at least in part, onto the show at some point. Warren could mix it in so the fans could hear a little bit of it, and then maybe they'd go to SoundCloud to hear more of your other songs too.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Time Wasted's a great one. And, there's a lot of my stuff there. All the stuff I did with Dean, all the stuff I did with Danielle, all the stuff I done on my own. So, a nice variety of music there. And I'm looking at it right now. Joe Tansin and Danielle Bizzuti, Love Just Ain't Enough. They don't come up with a particular address. This is SoundCloud.com. So I think when you go to SoundCloud, you just got to type in Joe Tansin.
All right, sounds good.
And when we're on this show, they grade us on YouTube if we drop any potty words. And if they do, they make it an adult show and we lose views. So from now on, if we say S-H-I-T, I'm going to call on Warren to use a humorous bleep, like if I slip and say shit, or any of the other 7 George Carlin words, because then they take our views away from us, which really is shit. Warren, you can bleep that one too, like make a big gong or something. And that way they can't steal our views from us, taking a show, suddenly, hey, look at all we got, and then it's cut in half like they took taxes. But I hand over to Warren so he can ask more questions of our esteemed guest.
All right, thank you, Bulldog. I appreciate that. And Joe, I hope you can get some of our dry humor that me and Bob have.
The regular desert. Take some comedy jokes with you so you don't starve.
No, that's good. You guys made my morning today here in Los Angeles, or my afternoon.
And that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Maybe we can put a smile on some other people's faces and let them listen to some of your songs.
That was great.
You mentioned Dean Ford and working with him. Can you tell us a little bit about him? And I really want to know about the most beautiful song I ever heard in my life. And it's called Reflections in My Life. Can you tell us about all of that?
Yeah, Dean and I had known each other for well over 30 years, 35 years. We became friends late 70s, I believe. He was living in a house in Woodland Hills, California, and I live in Woodland Hills now. I have a house in Woodland Hills, so where I first met him is probably only a few blocks away from where I'm living. He came to America with 3 brothers, the Nicholson brothers. There's Hugh Nicholson, Matt Nicholson, and David Nicholson. They had a band called Blue, and they were signed to Elton John's record label Rocket. And John Reed, who was Elton's manager, was having a feud with Matt Nicholson. Matt was the oldest of the Nicholson brothers, and he managed the group Blue. He was the manager. David and Hugh were the talent. And that's where I met Dean. Now, Dean was a friend of theirs. Hugh eventually joined Dean's band, the Marmalade, who originally recorded that song. They in 1969, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And Hugh became the leader of this group called Blue. And they had a few hits in England, but nothing here in America. And they came over here to seek fame and fortune and to try to get a record deal, because they were still tied up with Elton's label at the time, and they were trying to get out of that contract. Dean funded the whole group coming over here. He was the only one who really had any money, from royalties he made in the Marmalade. In England, they were a successful group. They had quite a lot of hits. Matter of fact, he had a #1 with Obladi Oblada. And it's a great version of the song. Dean just sings the hell out of it. And it made them a lot of money. And he sold his home in England to finance the trip to bring everybody over here. And they rented a house, and they all lived in the house, and it was a wild, crazy party house in the 70s. We'd get drunk and, you know, take things that we shouldn't have been taking and staying up all night long, singing songs, and until the last man standing. It was either myself or a guy named Ian McMillan. And this went on for a long, long time. And then I got a phone call from Joey Mullen at some point and said, I'm going to do a Badfinger tour. Would you like to come and join me? And at the time, I was really broke. I said, sure, I'll join you.
Right.
And Dean came to me and wanted to be the bus driver, the tour bus driver. And I said to him, I can't have you do that. I said, I'm going to be asking you to fetch my guitar and get me strings and stuff. And I just said, I don't know if I could do that. And he said, look, I really want to just get out of here for a little while and get on the road. And you know, I'd be more than happy to do this. And you know, I talked to Joey about it, and he said, sure. So he came along, drove the tour bus, and we did a big tour down south. And I remember one evening we were playing at a place called Kane's Ballroom in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a very famous place. I mean, Hank Williams played there, and all these legends, Lefty Frizzell, Dolly Parton. And they had this big, giant, life-size poster of Hank Williams, and staring right at you, like when you stood on the stage. And I remember standing on that stage thinking, holy shit, Hank stood here like, you know, 30, 40 years ago. And I remember calling Dean. You know, I know Dean, it was breaking his heart watching us play night after night and, you know, not being able to sing. So one night I called him up on stage, and, you know, he did the Benny King number, Stand By Me, and it was fantastic. He brought the house down. So after all of this, one day he knocked on my door, and he said, I've got some songs, and I've always had a little studio. And he said, would you like to help me record these? And this would have been, I don't know, 80s. And I said, sure. And we just kept working and working throughout the years, and, you know, never stopped. And then, you know, acquired, you know, kind of pretty good catalog of songs between the two of us. We weren't seeking recording contracts because, you know, the music business wasn't what it was. And we didn't really know if there was any interest in it, you know, from anybody for guys like us. So we didn't even try, but it didn't stop us from recording. We just kept recording.
Right.
And we got a German record company about, I don't know, 7 years ago, maybe, interested. They you know, they got a hold of us, and they said, would you like to do an album and for us? So we said, yeah, sure. You know, sent us over a contract, and we got about maybe 11 songs into it, and we were missing one or two more songs. And at that point, I was singing more of the songs than Dean was, and I just said, this doesn't balance out. I said, you need to sing a few more songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, what do you think of re-recording Reflections? I figured he'd tell me to go to hell, and, you know, I'm never going to do that. This will be crazy. But surprisingly enough, he said, okay. And I said, we'll do this really intimately, you know, with just an acoustic guitar, maybe finger picking, and you singing. And that's it. I went into the studio and I tried that approach. I remember sitting there one evening all by myself and the guitar and finger picking, and, you know, then I listened back and I go, no, this just isn't working for me. And I started thinking about George Harrison and, you know, the guitar strums on My Sweet Lord and that. And I said, well, this is the way this song really needs to be done. So I started strumming the guitar. I looked up on the wall and I seen a banjo hanging there. And I grabbed that and put down this little banjo part. And Dean and I both loved the banjo. We were both big fans of the Cool Hand Luke movie. And I think Paul Newman plays banjo in one scene when his mom dies and sits down at the bed and plays this song called Plastic Jesus. So I put the banjo in it and then a little string pad, and then the song started to develop, and called a few of my friends, a wonderful female cello player by the name of Jen Kuhn, who's actually, I just seen Jen recently playing in Paul McCartney's, he did a whole documentary on this song of all these jazz standards he was recording at Capitol Studios, and it was really wonderful. He did a great job singing these songs, and I looked over and I seen Jen playing cello in the in the section over there in the string section, but she's the one who's playing cello on Reflections of My Life. And then another friend of mine, Rick Salon, who plays amazing fiddle. His dad was in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He came in, and the music was just beautiful. And then Dean came in and just nailed it to the wall with the most beautiful vocal. And, the song that's got, almost 4 million views at this point. And unfortunately, last year, he passed away at the very beginning of the year. And,
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he was a good friend for a long time, and I think a real, as far as a singer goes, he was a class act. There's very few better.
Yeah, I think the video's on YouTube, and I'm going to try to stick it in at the end of this show when I do the video. So, because I think that's the most beautiful song I ever heard. It is great. Good job on that.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm sure Dean would appreciate that too.
Yeah. Badfinger backed up George Harrison on Bangladesh. I believe it was the album and the concert. Although you weren't there at the time, was there anything about that related to you by your friends in the group? What do you think about that project and how it stood up over time, being the only rock charity event?
Well, I tried kind of consciously not to talk much about the past when I was with Joey and Tommy, and even at some point Mike came over from England because he was working for a female singer from Wales called Bonnie Tyler, and she had a #1 in America with a song called "It's a Heartache." It's kind of gravelly voice, Rod Stewart kind of sounding. And at some point, Mike came over, and there was, it was all the original members except for Pete, obviously, and I just wanted to be respectful and not bring things up that might be painful for them to talk about, such as,
right.
the Beatles and all of that stuff. I know is a touchy subject around those guys, and everybody else. And I watched people that were around at the time. That's all they wanted to ask, and talk about what was it like working with these people.
Exactly.
And I didn't do that. I just let them and allowed them to, to talk about those kind of things when they felt they wanted to.
Right.
But I do remember the Bangladesh thing and, some of the stories. And I remember, I think it was Joey who said it was amazing to look around you and, and see the greatest musicians of our time gathered on that stage and being there. And I could only imagine what that must have been like. And then there was another time he told me him and Tom went into John's studio, I think it was, at his house in Ascot when they were recording the Imagine album. And John was showing him the song Jealous Guy for the first time. And I think Joe and Tommy were both sitting on the floor in the lotus position with acoustic guitars. And John was sitting in a stool looking down upon them and showing them the song for the very first time. And that's certainly a great John Lennon song. And my friend Nicky Hopkins plays piano on it as well. And I only can imagine what it must have been like hearing these songs for the very first time.
Right.
And John was showing them the chords. And so, occasionally they tell some Beatles stories and, things that happen that maybe not a lot of people know about.
Right.
Some of them I don't even know if I could talk about on your show.
Well, that's a story I haven't heard, and I'm glad you told it to me. It was nice to hear. I'm a John Lennon fan, and it's always nice to hear something different about John.
I'll tell you another funny story. You got 5 minutes or 2 minutes? I'll condense
Shh,
it as fast as
I,
I can.
I got all the time you need.
All right. There's another friend of ours, a Scottish guy. He's a friend of Dean's. He used to be in a band called Trash, and you guys need to look them up because they were also signed to Apple Records. I think they got signed before Badfinger. They only did, I think they did two records or two singles for Apple, and one was called, and you can find this. You have to look on YouTube, and I just seen it recently. Golden Slumbers by Trash. It's a cover version of the Beatles' Golden Slumbers.
Mm.
Ian Clues was the lead singer. He's a very good friend of mine, and he's a real character. Still around, lives here in Los Angeles. I haven't seen him in a while. There was a guy named Richard DeLello also who wrote a book about the Beatles in the 60s called The Longest Cocktail Party. Richard went on to become a very well-respected film director here in Los Angeles, and he was also a photographer. He took a lot of Beatles photographs. He took a lot of Badfinger stuff, and he came over from New York. He loved the Beatles, and he wound up at Apple, and they called him the house hippie. I think they even let him live there. So him and Ian became good friends. Ian's group just got signed by to the Beatles label Apple, and they were like a Scottish soul band. Anyway, they were wandering around at Apple, and they found this room apparently where they had a whole bunch of film canisters, and the film canisters, were outtakes of a lot of the Beatles promotional films, things like this. Were in there, and it's just. They found this canister, and they were shaking it, and it was rattling, and it's like it had something inside of it, and it wasn't film. So the two of them were like mischievous school kids. They opened it up, and they found a big, giant rock of hashish in the film canister.
Wow.
So they go to John Lennon's office, who had an office there, and they knock on the door, and there's that voice. Come in. It's like the Wizard of Oz. And
Right.
they, these two sheepish guys walk in and they go, we found this film canister in the room downstairs. And John says, bring it to me. So he opens it up, looks at it for a few minutes, looks at them, cracks off a piece, puts it on his desk, puts the lid back on the canister, gives it to them, and says, now F off.
Wow. He didn't torch it up right then and there, huh?
No, but I think he was quite pleased to get that big piece.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Funny story, though.
Yeah, it is. I enjoyed it. You recently went to Ruth and Angie McCartney's place to record an interview. What was it like recording that interview, and how did you come about to meet and know Ruth and Angie?
A guy I know from Scotland, we'd become friends. His name is Ray Kahn. Ray is a friend of Mike McCartney, and later he became friends with Paul and Linda. And Ray is an excellent photographer, and I think it might have been during the 80s, might have even been was it the 80s or the 70s? It was some Wings tour, and Ray was with them, and he said, I got all these very intimate pictures of Paul and Linda. And he said we were in a hotel room and we all had too much to drink and we were all passed out on the bed. And he said I grabbed my camera, and everybody was just laying there. And he said I started taking pictures. And he stockpiled a whole bunch of pictures of Paul. And I think Ruth and Angie are doing a book, or done a book. And these were photographs that they had not seen.
Right.
So they wanted Ray to deliver the photographs, and he said sure, And he had never met Angie or Ruth before, but he was, he was very good friends with Mike. I guess Mike was was the first one he met. And he absolutely loved the Glasgow Road, which was the song I recorded with Dean.
Right.
He thought it was the best thing he'd ever heard. So he contacted me some years back, and he said, I've got this song I've written. And he's written songs with Mike McCartney before. They wrote something about Princess Di. I know he told me about that. I think it got into the charts into the UK. It was around, about her death or something.
Right.
And he contacted me and said, I've got these lyrics about Ellis Island, and I'm in contact with the Ellis Island Foundation. He said, I love the Glasgow Road so much, Joe. Is there any way that you would consider writing the music for this and singing it and recording it? And I'd kind of been busy at the time, and I was blowing him off for a little bit. And I said, Ray, I just don't have the time. And he contacted me again, and he said, did Ruth or Angie McCartney ever get in touch with you? And I said, no. I said, why would they? And he said, well, apparently they seen heard a little bit about the show in My Backyard, and they liked the idea, and they were interested in talking to you. So that's how it happened. He said, I'm in town for a couple of days, and I'll come over to your place and spend the night if that's okay. And he said, in the morning we'll go to Ruth and Angie's and do their show. He said, I've got all these these photographs that they want, and I'm sure they'd like to talk to you about Badfinger and the My Backyard show. So that's how that came about. And they were the sweetest two women. They were really, really wonderful. And I brought my daughter Sarah with, and she had a wonderful morning there.
Wow, that's great. You mentioned your daughter and Ruth singing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm starting a jazz record right now. Something I've always wanted to do. Very, traditional 30s, 40s jazz standards, Billie Holiday stuff. The hell out of this stuff. Sarah sounds like Billie Holiday. Amy Winehouse is a big, she loved Amy Winehouse as well. And Sarah's like 24 or 25. And I asked her, I said, why don't you come and do some stuff with me on this record? It'll give you an opportunity to maybe get your name out there. And after I left Ruth's, I discovered that she was a singer as well. And she's got a really good voice. So one evening, I sent her a text. I said, "Hey Ruth, I'm going to be starting this jazz record." I just said, "Why don't you come down to the house and sing on a couple of tracks?" And she said that'd be a lot of fun. So I'm hoping to have her come down and maybe sing on a few tracks.
Right. That would be great. I like to hear that myself.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm actually having a guitar sent to me right now. A D'Angelico, big guy who made all these amazing jazz instruments in the 1930s in New York, all by hand. An Italian artisan, and some of them are worth a fortune today. But this is the kind of instrument I want to use on this record. I want it to have that sort of 30s, 40s sound to the guitar. So I'm, I talked to the guys. They resurrected the D'Angelico name, and they're rebuilding the guitars again, and they're really, really nice. And they're going to be sending me one. And as soon as I get the guitar, I'm off. I'm going to start on this record. Besides, I got nothing else to do. We're all quarantined in Los Angeles. So might as well make a record.
Yeah, and give you something real nice to do. I love
exactly.
And if you could send that to me whenever you get it done, I'd love to hear it.
I will do so, and you'll probably see some videos on YouTube. If we finish this, we'll definitely shoot some videos, and
Right.
You'll see them.
Right, that'll be great to see. All right, can you tell us about your albums? Do you have any thoughts or stories behind any of them or related to them?
Well, the last thing that I did. There's an album, a collection of songs on an album called Paradise Cove, and that's with Dean. So it's a Dean Ford, Joe Tansin record, and that kind of sums up maybe the last. My entire relationship with Dean is on that record over the years, and that's for me that's a real important one, and it just came out I think about 6 months ago. So if any of you guys are listening, you can buy it on CD Baby, I believe, and it's called Paradise Cove. It's a wonderful record, a beautiful collection of songs, and there's one in particular. There's a lovely rendition of a Bob Dylan song called "Emotionally Yours" on there that will just rip your heart out.
Wow, you just struck a nerve with Bob. If you got something to say, Bob, go ahead.
Emotionally Yours from Empire Burlesque, I believe.
Oh yeah. That's a record not too many people are familiar with, but yes, it is.
You speak as if you know Dylan well. If I can just ask, because I'm a pretty big listener of his stuff for quite some time. What's your favorite Dylan stuff? And I guess you like Empire Burlesque. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, there was another song on that album called "Sweetheart Like You," and it was either between that and
one was Infidels. That was on Infidels.
Oh, that was it. That's right, Infidels. Okay. So, but I had those two songs sort of hand-picked, "Sweetheart Like You" and "Emotionally Yours," from two different albums that I approached Dean with. I used to pick out a lot of songs for him. Occasionally, him and I would cover a song. Like on the Paradise Cove album, there's two covers. There's the "Emotionally Yours" by Bob Dylan and a beautiful version of Townes Van Zant's "No Place to Fall." And Dean just, there's certain songs that he were just meant for that guy to sing. And these were two good ones. But asking me about Bob Dylan, my favorite album was "Blood on the Tracks."
Hard to top. I consider that his romance album, his marriage, which was about to break up, and the love songs on there, "Tangled Up in Blue," "Lily Rosemary," "The Jack of Hearts," and those songs are kind of hard to top. That album's a absolute classic. So hearing you talk about it is quite interesting. Keep going, please.
Well, that album was probably in my top 5 favorite records of all time. Certainly one that I never get tired of listening to. And, when I'm in a real reflective mood, you got to be in the right frame of mind to listen to that record. And,
sure.
I never get tired of it.
Now, you're from the Malibu area, and you've played with heavyweights, and being a heavyweight yourself player, have you ever run across Dylan or such?
Seen him in a parking lot one day in the Malibu market. Not too far away from him, and I thought, should I say something or should I not? And I chose not to. I just walked away.
I don't blame you. You never know what you're going to get when you hear of people running into him. It runs the gamut.
Yeah, what do you say to Bob? Hey, nice day. Yeah, sure is.
All right, I had to thank you for letting me get my Dylan out here, Warren, and back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I knew that struck a chord with it, Bob, so I let you go on. Anyway, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to hand it back to Bob to ask you a question or two and to close out the show. You play a variety of instruments and you produce. Can you speak on any of that?
Well, I don't call myself, I wouldn't be like Prince and boast that I play 40 instruments. Matter of fact, he went on and on and on and on about all the instruments he played, but I never really heard him play anything all that well. It's one thing to say, he was a good guitar player, no doubt about that, but just because you pick up the harmonica and you blow a few notes on a record doesn't mean you're a harmonica player.
Okay.
That being said, I like to play the mandolin. Love the sound of the mandolin, and I can get around on that instrument pretty well. Bottleneck guitar, bass. I've always played bass, and most of the time it's just because there was nobody else around to do it. So, you know, if I'm sitting in the studio and I'm working on a track and I didn't have time to, you know, to arrange for a session player to come down and lay a bass down on a track, I'd always have one in the studio and I'd pick it up and play for myself. Keyboard, I'm an adequate keyboard player and, you know, a decent piano player. I think over the years, Warren, I just, I learned how to play a lot of instruments out of necessity. You know, I'd have all these things around to me, and I'm kind of a loner by nature. I'm somewhat secluded living here. You know, I have a nice place. I have a lot of space, and I don't have any need to go out very often. So, you know, I'll stay here, and I would just grab all these things, you know, anything that was available to me to play, banjo,
Right.
etc. But I would not call myself a virtuoso on any of those instruments. However, I'm a very capable guitar player. That is my thing.
Right. Thank you for all them answers. I loved your stories. I love your music. And I thank you for being on the show. And I'm going to hand it over to the Bulldog.
I'm just
All right,
checking.
Warren. It was my pleasure.
It's my pleasure, Joe. More my pleasure than yours.
Well, thank you, guys.
To our guest, I remind you you're under oath, and the Tomorrow Never Knows judges are here. They told me to remind you of that as you answer the serious question. Have you played with or met, jammed with any of the Beatles? Any Beatles, personal Beatles stories?
No, not played with them. Met Ringo once at his house. We went to his place on Sunswept Plaza Drive, I believe it is, and I won't give out his real address. I promise.
How about his phone number after the show?
Yeah, Joey Molland had some business with him, and we were on our way to rehearsal one day, so we pulled in a driveway, and you know, he didn't say anything to us about where we were going, but once we got in the driveway, you know, he said it's Ringo's house. And it's really a funny story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but he said Ringo owed him some money from a card game.
Me too. He owes me some.
And we were going there to collect. So I met him that afternoon, and that was the only Beatle I met.
Well, he owes me too, so maybe he can come on the show and pay me back.
We'll call it even.
Yeah.
So he wasn't with Bob Dylan in the parking lot?
No.
Just check.
No, he was in his driveway.
What was he standing there with the money? Did you have an enforcer with you? He closed his eyes and held it out.
Oh, I'm not even going to tell you how much money it was. You'd be laughing for the rest of the day.
Yeah, a couple
All right,
dollars.
run the gamut of over and under. Without doing that, how much money was it?
I can't tell you.
Like 75 cents or 75 million, which would be closer?
No. It was closer to 75 cents.
Okay, that's fair. So,
good try, Bulldog.
if they're going to give you 3/4, you'd probably, put them up as collectibles Ringo touched, and you'd make even more money. If the fans want to follow you online, they want to look up your songs, what you're doing, what you're up to, where would they go to find you online?
Well, I don't have a website. Don't really feel as though I have the need for one. You want to find me online, you can find My Backyard page on Facebook, My Backyard at Facebook.com. You can Joe Tansin on Facebook. Music, always posted on SoundCloud, so just look up Joe Tansin on SoundCloud. And all the videos that I've done over the years are all posted on YouTube. So if you type in Joe Tansin, Dean Ford. By the way, since this is a Beatles show, there's a really good version of You Gotta Hide Your Love Away by a guy named Joe Tansin on YouTube.
We listened to that today. We listened to that today. I said to Warren, is that version the Beatles song, or is that like a song with the same title and a different song? And we played that and we listened to it and we were both quite impressed.
Yeah. A lot of people like that one.
It's catchy and you did a very nice rendition, sir.
Yes.
And you can dance to it. Just kidding.
I hope you're getting our dry sense of humor there, Joe.
Listen, trust me, mine's a lot drier than yours.
Praying for rain over here. We have a tradition here in the Beatles Kingdom on Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah.
And we're not great singers, but to send out a good vibe and a good Beatle-y vibe, we close the show with the end from Abbey Road. I was wondering if you'd keep that tradition going, if you'd be a sport, if you'd slum it and sing with us.
Yeah, but as I told you, you've got to understand, I'm just getting over a cold and a sore throat, and my voice is probably about 2 octaves, and it's cracky and croaky, so don't expect much.
So sing a Bob Dylan song, and nobody will know the difference. How about Tangled Up Blue?
Tangled Up in Blue.
And there you go. That was a good one.
All right. So we'll give it a shot. I'll start. You go in the middle, and then Warren will close us out with that one. And then we'll stay on, and we'll do a shout-out for Beatles Magazine, who we love. So here we go. 1 and 2, as Lawrence Welk used to say. And in the end,
the love you take
is equal to the love you make. All right. Thank you for that, Joe. I appreciate that. And if you could, please give us a shout out for Beatles Magazine.
Yeah, here's a big thumbs up for Beatles Magazine, and lovely Rita for anything Beatles, anything about the Beatles that you want to know. That's where you should go to find the answers to your questions.
All right.
Absolutely. You rocked it today, and thank you for being a fantastic guest.
got to hide.